The morning rush at Grand Central Station was like any other Tuesday. Thousands of people moved through the massive terminal like a river, each person lost in their own world. Some clutched coffee cups like lifelines. Others had their faces buried in phones. Everyone was going somewhere and no one had time to stop. Among them was a man who looked perfectly ordinary. He wore faded jeans, an old gray hoodie, and beat-up sneakers that had seen better days. A canvas messenger bag hung from his shoulder, the kind college students carry. Thick-rimmed glasses sat on his nose and a baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes. He could have been anyone. A teacher. An office worker. Maybe a graduate student running late for class. But he wasn't just anyone. His name was David, and hidden beneath that unremarkable appearance was one of the youngest billionaires in the country. He had built a tech empire from nothing, starting in a tiny apartment with just a laptop and an idea. His software had changed how businesses operated around the world. His face had been on magazine covers. World leaders had his personal phone number. Yet here he stood, invisible in a sea of strangers, and he had never felt more free. David had slipped out of his penthouse apartment that morning without telling anyone. No security team. No assistant scheduling his every minute. No driver waiting with a black car. He had walked to the subway like a regular person, paid with a card like everyone else, and rode the train squeezed between a nurse heading home from a night shift and a construction worker reading the sports section. It felt wonderful. The past few years had been suffocating. Every day was the same routine of board meetings, investor calls, and fancy dinners where people talked but never really said anything. He lived in a bubble of luxury that somehow felt smaller than the cramped apartment he had started in. He had everything money could buy, but he couldn't remember the last time he had felt truly alive. That's why he was here. He needed to remember what it felt like to be just another person in the world. As he walked through the terminal, letting the crowd flow around him, something caught his eye. In the middle of the main concourse sat a black piano. It was one of those public pianos that stations and airports sometimes put out, inviting anyone to sit down and play. He had seen videos online of talented strangers playing beautiful music for surprised travelers. Those moments always seemed so pure, so real. David stopped walking and stared at the piano. His fingers tingled with a familiar feeling. He hadn't played in almost a year. There was always some meeting, some crisis, some reason why he couldn't spare the time. But once upon a time, music had been everything to him. His mother had started teaching him when he was 5 years old. By the time he was 10, he was playing in competitions. By 15, he could make a piano sing in ways that brought tears to people's eyes. His mother used to tell him something he never quite understood back then. "Music isn't about being perfect," she would say, watching him practice the same passage over and over, frustrated by tiny mistakes. "It's about touching something deep inside people. It's about connection." He had been too young and too focused on winning to understand, but she was gone now, taken by illness before she could see his success. And standing here in this crowded station, anonymous and alone despite being surrounded by thousands of people, he finally understood what she meant. David looked around. A few people sat on nearby benches waiting for trains. Others hurried past, checking their watches. Nobody was paying any attention to the piano. It sat there, silent and patient, waiting for someone brave enough to share their music with strangers. His heart started beating faster. Part of him felt nervous. What if someone recognized him? What if he made mistakes? What if people filmed him and it ended up all over the internet? But another part of him, a part he thought had died somewhere between his first million and his first billion, was practically begging him to sit down and play. He walked over slowly, feeling like he was approaching something sacred. His worn messenger bag slid off his shoulder, and he set it down gently beside the bench. The piano was old but well-maintained. Someone clearly cared about it. The keys were clean, and when he pressed one softly, the note rang out clear and true. David sat down. The bench was a little too high, so he adjusted it, hearing the familiar creak. His hands hovered over the keys, and suddenly he was 17 again, sitting in his mother's hospital room playing for her while she smiled despite the pain. He was 8 years old, discovering that his fingers could create beauty from thin air. He was every age and no age, suspended in this moment before sound became music. He took a deep breath. Around him, the station continued its endless rhythm. Announcements echoed from speakers. Footsteps clicked on marble floors. Voices blended into a constant hum. But for David, all of that faded into background noise. He began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated out into the vast space. It was the piece his mother had loved most. She used to play it on Sunday mornings when she thought no one was listening. David would sit at the top of the stairs, hidden, just listening to her pour emotion into every phrase. Now it was his turn to play it for her, even though she couldn't hear it. He played for the memory of her smile, for the way she used to ruffle his hair when he got a difficult passage right, for all the conversations they never got to have after she was gone. As his fingers moved across the keys, muscle memory took over. The countless hours of practice came flooding back. But this time he wasn't playing to win a competition or impress judges. He wasn't playing to prove anything to anyone. He was playing because his soul needed to speak, and this was the only language it knew. The music flowed through him, each note carrying years of locked-away feeling, the loneliness of success, the weight of expectations, the hollow echo of applause that meant nothing, the desperate wish to go back to simpler times when his biggest worry was mastering a difficult piece, not managing $1 billion company. He didn't notice that a woman dragging a suitcase had stopped to listen, or that an elderly man had lowered his newspaper, his eyes fixed on the piano, or that a mother had paused with her restless child, both of them suddenly still. David's eyes were closed now. His body swayed gently with the music, completely lost in the moment. This was what he had been missing. This connection, this purpose, this feeling of creating something beautiful just for the sake of beauty itself, with no quarterly reports or shareholders or stock prices attached. The nocturne built toward its emotional peak, and David's fingers pressed the keys with increasing intensity. Every person who stopped to listen felt something stir inside them, though they couldn't quite name what it was. It was the sound of genuine emotion, unfiltered and raw, and it was impossible to ignore. More people began to gather, drawn by something they couldn't explain. In a place defined by rushing and checking the time and hurrying to the next thing, someone had dared to stop and create something meaningful, and the whole station was about to change because of it. The music filled every corner of the massive terminal. Those first notes cut through the noise of announcements and footsteps and hurried conversations like light breaking through clouds. People who had been rushing to catch trains found their feet slowing down, then stopping completely. A businessman in an expensive suit froze mid-step. He had been thinking about a presentation he was supposed to give in an hour, mentally rehearsing his talking points. But something about the music made all of that seem suddenly unimportant. He stood there, briefcase in hand, just listening. Near the information booth, a college student had been scrolling through her phone, half watching some video she wouldn't remember 5 minutes later. The sound of the piano made her look up. She watched the hooded figure at the keyboard, his whole body moving with the music. Without thinking, she pulled up her camera app and hit record. An elderly woman carrying grocery bags set them down on a bench. She had heard this piece before many years ago. Her late husband used to play piano, nothing fancy, just for fun on weekends. He had been gone for 3 years now, and she hadn't heard anyone play like this since. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. David played on, completely unaware of the small crowd beginning to form. He had moved deeper into the nocturne now, into the passages that required complete focus. His fingers danced across the keys, hitting every note with precision. But it wasn't just technical skill. Anyone could learn to hit the right notes. What made people stop and stare was the emotion pouring out of every phrase. He was playing like someone who had forgotten he was in public. Like someone who needed the music more than he needed air. A mother holding the hand of a restless 5-year-old boy had been trying to calm him down. He had been whining about being tired, about wanting to go home, about everything the way kids do. But when the music started, he went quiet. He stared at the piano with wide eyes like he was watching something magical happen. "Mommy, is that person famous?" he whispered. The mother didn't know. She was too busy fighting back her own tears. The music was bringing back memories she had pushed away. Her own childhood piano lessons that she quit after 2 years. Her father's disappointment. The what-ifs that everyone carries around. More people gathered. 10 became 20. 20 became 40. They formed a natural semicircle around the piano, careful not to get too close, not wanting to break whatever spell was being cast. Some held up phones to record. Others just stood with their mouths slightly open, transfixed. A teenage girl who had been arguing loudly on her phone, her voice sharp with teenage anger about something that probably wouldn't matter tomorrow, had stopped mid-sentence. She lowered her phone without even saying goodbye and just stood there. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something softer. Something that looked almost like wonder. Then David did something unexpected. As the nocturne reached its gentle conclusion, he didn't stop. Instead, he transitioned smoothly into something completely different. He took Chopin's classical phrases and transformed them into jazz. The melody was still there, recognizable, but now it had a different heartbeat. It swung and syncopated and improvised in ways that made several people in the crowd gasp out loud. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Classical pianists didn't just switch into jazz like that. It required a different way of thinking, a different relationship with the music. But David moved between the styles like someone switching languages, completely fluent in both. An off-duty police officer who had been grabbing coffee before heading home stopped with his cup halfway to his lips. He had a daughter he hadn't spoken to in 6 months. They had fought about something stupid, and both of them were too stubborn to call first. Listening to this music, he suddenly couldn't remember what they had even fought about. He pulled out his phone, but not to record. He opened his messages and started typing. A nurse ending her overnight shift sat down heavily on a nearby bench. She had lost a patient earlier that night. A young man, barely 30, car accident. She had done everything right, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She carried those losses with her, all of them, a weight that got heavier with each passing year. The music didn't make that weight disappear, but somehow it made it feel a little less crushing. The crowd had grown to over 60 people now. Station security noticed the gathering and started walking over, probably to break it up to keep traffic flowing. But when they got close enough to hear the music, they stopped too. One of them, a man who had worked at the station for 15 years and thought he had seen everything, found himself blinking back tears. He couldn't explain why. He just knew that something real was happening here. David shifted again. This time he played something that sounded contemporary, more modern. It was a piece he had written himself years ago, back when he still had time to compose. Back when creating music mattered more than creating quarterly growth. He had never performed it for anyone. It lived in a notebook in his apartment, gathering dust along with all the other dreams he had set aside for success. The melody was bittersweet. It spoke of ambition and achievement, but also of loss, of the things you give up to get the things you thought you wanted, of standing at the top and realizing the view isn't what you expected. A homeless veteran sitting against a wall nearby closed his eyes. He had seen things in war that still woke him up screaming some nights. He lived in a shelter now, his life packed into a single backpack. People walked past him every day without seeing him. But this music saw him. It spoke to the parts of him that he thought had died overseas. For these few minutes, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't broken. He was just a human being feeling something beautiful. The crowd continued to swell. 100 people now, maybe more. They had created a bottleneck in the usually free-flowing terminal. Other travelers trying to get past were annoyed at first, until they heard what everyone was listening to. Then they stayed too. A man who had been planning to propose to his girlfriend that evening gripped the small box in his pocket and smiled. A woman on her way to a job interview she didn't think she was qualified for stood up a little straighter. A teenager who had been thinking about dropping out of music school because it seemed impractical and foolish felt something shift inside his chest. David played for 22 minutes straight. He moved through classical pieces and jazz standards and contemporary music and even a stunning arrangement of a popular song that had everyone swaying together without realizing they were doing it. It wasn't a concert. It was something more than that. It was a shared moment of pure human connection in a place usually defined by isolation and rushing and not having time for anything that matters. His fingers finally pressed the last chord, a single note that seemed to hang in the air forever, not wanting to fade. When it finally did, silence fell over the crowd. Complete silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite clapping. It was thunderous. People were cheering and whistling and shouting. Some were crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. They had witnessed something they knew they would remember for the rest of their lives. David opened his eyes slowly, like someone waking up from a dream. He looked surprised to find himself surrounded by so many people. For a moment, he seemed confused about where he was. Then reality came flooding back. He stood up quickly, grabbing his messenger bag, his face flushing red under his cap. He gave a small, embarrassed smile and started to walk away. "Wait," someone called out. It was the college student still recording on her phone. "Who are you?" David turned back. For just a second, part of his face was visible under the cap. He looked young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that had seen too much too soon. "Just someone who needed to remember something important," he said quietly. His voice was gentle, thoughtful, the voice of someone who chose his words carefully. Then he disappeared into the crowd, weaving between people before anyone could stop him or ask more questions. Within 30 seconds, he was gone, swallowed up by the endless river of commuters. The crowd stood there for a moment longer, not quite ready to let go of what had just happened. Then slowly, people began to move again, returning to their trains and their appointments and their lives. But they moved differently now. A little slower, a little more aware, a little more human. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the college student's video had been viewed 50,000 times. By dinner, it had crossed 2 million. By the time most people were getting ready for bed, it was sitting at 15 million views and climbing fast. The internet had discovered the mystery pianist. Who is this person? Read one comment with 30,000 likes. "I've listened to this 20 times and I cry every single time," wrote another. "This is what pure talent looks like," someone else added. The comments section had become a place where strangers shared their feelings, their stories, their reactions to something that had moved them deeply. The video had been shot from behind, showing just the hooded figure at the piano, his body swaying with the music. You couldn't see his face clearly, just glimpses of a profile, the side of his jaw, hands moving across the keys. But somehow that made it even more powerful. He could have been anyone. He could have been everyone. Other videos started popping up. Different angles from different phones. Someone had filmed from the side. Another person had recorded the crowd's reactions. There were at least 20 different versions floating around social media now, each one going viral in its own right. Mystery piano player stuns Grand Central Station, tweeted a popular music account. The tweet had been shared 40,000 times. "Who is this genius and why isn't he famous?" asked a viral post on another platform. Except nobody knew the answer. The internet loves a mystery, and this was a good one. People started analyzing every frame of the videos like detectives. They zoomed in on his clothes, looking for clues. They listened to his playing style, comparing it to famous pianists. Music teachers weighed in with their professional opinions. "That's at least 15 years of classical training," one wrote. "Probably started as a child. This isn't some amateur who learned from YouTube videos." Others noticed his hands in the close-up shots. "Those aren't the hands of someone who works construction or types all day," someone pointed out. "Look how smooth they are. And that ring on his right hand looks expensive. Like really expensive." But most people didn't care about solving the mystery. They just wanted to share how the music made them feel. A woman wrote a long post about how she had watched the video while sitting in her car, trying to work up the courage to walk into a therapy appointment. "I've been struggling with depression for 2 years," she wrote. "I almost didn't go in. But something about this music reminded me that beauty still exists in the world. I went to my appointment. Thank you, Mystery Piano Man." A father shared that he had called his daughter for the first time in 3 years after watching. They had stopped speaking after a fight about her career choices. "Life's too short," he wrote. "This video reminded me of that. We talked for 2 hours. We're having dinner next week." A young musician posted about how he had been planning to quit music school because his parents said it wasn't practical. "I was going to drop out and get a business degree," he wrote. "But after watching this, I remembered why I fell in love with music in the first place. I'm staying." The stories kept coming. Hundreds of them. Thousands. People sharing how a random video of a stranger playing piano had somehow changed something inside them. But while millions were falling in love with the mystery, a smaller group was getting closer to the truth. A music journalist who specialized in classical piano had watched the video a dozen times. Something about the playing style nagged at her memory. She had covered the classical music world for 20 years and had seen a lot of talented pianists. But this particular combination of technical precision and emotional depth, this specific way of transitioning between styles, felt familiar. She started digging through her archives. Old concert reviews, charity galas, fundraising events. Then she found it. A video from 3 years ago of a tech CEO playing piano at a benefit for children's hospitals. The performance had been brief, just one piece, and not many people had paid attention because the focus was on how much money was being raised. But the playing style was identical. She pulled up photos of the CEO. Young guy, early 30s, made billions creating some kind of software that changed everything about cloud computing. His name was David Chen. She compared the side profile from the Grand Central videos to photos of him. The jawline matched. The build was right. And that ring on his right hand appeared in several photographs from business magazines. She spent 6 hours putting together a thread on social media, laying out her evidence piece by piece. Is the Grand Central piano player David Chen, billionaire CEO of CloudSync Technologies? Her thread went viral immediately. Across the city in a luxury penthouse, David was completely unaware of the storm brewing online. He had spent the day in back-to-back meetings, his brief escape to the station that morning feeling like a dream already. His assistant, a sharp woman named Patricia who had worked with him for 5 years, kept giving him strange looks, but he was too distracted to notice. Finally, during a break between video calls, she knocked on his office door. "David, we need to talk. Can it wait? I have the board meeting in 10 minutes. "It really can't." She walked in and closed the door behind her. "Are you aware that you're currently trending on every major social media platform?" David looked up from his laptop, confused. "What? That's impossible. I haven't posted anything. The company hasn't made any announcements." Patricia pulled out her phone and showed him. His face went pale as he scrolled through video after video of himself at the piano. "How many people have seen this?" At last count, about 25 million. And climbing, he felt his stomach drop. "This is bad. This is really bad. The board is going to think I'm losing it. We have the merger talks next month. The investors are already nervous about the quarterly numbers, and now they're going to see their CEO playing piano in a train station like some kind of..." "David." Patricia cut him off. "Have you actually read any of the comments?" He hadn't. He had been too panicked about the exposure, about being discovered, about what this meant for his carefully controlled public image. She sat down across from him. "You should read them." David spent the next 30 minutes scrolling through comments and posts and shares. His assistant had been right. He needed to see this. The stories people were sharing. The ways the music had affected them. The connections they were making with their own lives. One comment in particular stopped him cold. It was from a man who said he worked security at Grand Central. "Mr. Chen, you don't know me, but I was there yesterday. I let my daughter listen to the recording last night. She's been sick for a long time and hasn't smiled in weeks. She smiled yesterday. She asked if she could start piano lessons when she gets better. Thank you for reminding us that beauty still exists in hard times." David read it 3 times. Then he read it again. His phone buzzed with another call. Then another. The board members wanting an emergency meeting. His PR team wanting to discuss damage control. Major news networks requesting interviews. His lawyer warning him about maintaining the company's image during sensitive business negotiations. Everyone had an opinion about what this meant and what he should do about it. But sitting there in his office, surrounded by expensive furniture and awards and framed magazine covers, David realized something. For the first time in years, he had done something that actually mattered to people, not because it made them money. Not because it made their businesses run more efficiently, but because it touched something real inside them. He had built an empire by solving technical problems. But yesterday morning, playing for strangers who didn't know his name or his net worth, he had solved a different kind of problem. He had reminded people, including himself, what it felt like to be human. The music journalist thread had gained traction. More outlets were picking up the story. "Billionaire goes undercover, gives free concert," read one headline. "Tech tycoon secret talent breaks the internet," announced another. By evening, it was on the national news. David turned off his phone and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The city glittered below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives. He had spent so long trying to conquer this city, to prove himself, to build something that would last. But what would actually last? Another software update? Another quarterly earnings report? Or the moment when a sick child smiled because she heard music that made her want to learn piano. He knew the answer. He had always known it deep down. He had just forgotten somewhere along the way. The question now was what he was going to do about it. His phone buzzed again. The board meeting was about to start. They would want explanations. They would want assurances that he wasn't having some kind of breakdown. They would want him to issue a statement, to control the narrative, to make this go away. David picked up his phone and opened his messages. He started typing, his fingers moving as deliberately as they had across piano keys. What he wrote would change everything. The board meeting was exactly as terrible as David expected. 12 faces stared at him through video screens, each one wearing the same expression of concern mixed with barely concealed anger. These were serious people who managed serious money, and they did not appreciate surprises. "David, what were you thinking?" The question came from Richard, the oldest board member and the one who had fought hardest against giving someone so young the CEO position. "We're in the middle of delicate negotiations. Our investors are already nervous about market conditions, and now you're viral on the internet playing piano in a train station?" "I needed some air," David said simply. "You needed air?" Another board member, Christine, leaned forward. "You're the face of this company. Everything you do reflects on us, on our shareholders, on our valuation. Do you understand how this looks?" David understood perfectly how it looked. That was exactly the problem. "It looks like a person playing music," he said. "That's all it was. That's not all it is, and you know it." Richard's face was getting red. "We have competitors who will use this to paint you as unstable, unfocused. They'll say you're not serious about the business anymore. They'll say, maybe they'd be right." The silence that followed those 4 words was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop across 12 different video connections in 12 different cities. "What did you just say?" Christine asked carefully. David took a deep breath. He had spent the last 3 hours thinking about this moment, reading comments from strangers whose lives his music had touched, remembering what it felt like to create something beautiful, with no other purpose than the beauty itself, thinking about his mother and what she would tell him if she were still alive. "I'm not quitting," he said, "but I am making some changes to the company and to my role in it." The next 20 minutes were chaos. Board members talking over each other, threats of votes and restructuring, warnings about stock prices and investor confidence. David let them vent. He had expected this, but he also knew something they didn't. He wasn't the same person who had built this company. That person had been hungry and driven and willing to sacrifice everything for success. This person, the one sitting here now, had remembered what success was supposed to be for. When the shouting finally died down, David spoke. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. I'll remain as CEO, but I'm bringing in a COO to handle the routine decisions. Someone good, someone you'll approve of. I'll still be involved in major strategy and direction, but I'm also starting something new." "New? What new?" Richard demanded. "A foundation. It's going to be called the Harmony Project." More silence. Then carefully, one of the younger board members spoke up. "What does this foundation do?" David pulled up a document he'd spent the afternoon preparing. "It puts pianos in public spaces across the country. Train stations, parks, airports, town squares, places where people gather. It funds music education in schools that have had their programs cut. It provides grants to working musicians and artists. It creates spaces for people to experience beauty and art without having to pay for it." "That's..." Christine searched for words. "That's very charitable. But what does it have to do with CloudSync?" "Nothing. And everything." David looked at each face on the screen. "I built this company to solve problems, to make things more efficient. And we did that. We're still doing that. But yesterday I solved a different kind of problem. I reminded people that there's more to life than efficiency, and hundreds of thousands of people have told me how much they needed that reminder." He pulled up some of the comments and messages he'd received. The sick girl who wanted to learn piano, the father who called his estranged daughter, the veteran who felt seen for the first time in years, the musician who decided not to give up. These are real people whose lives were changed by 3 minutes of music. David said quietly, "When was the last time any of us could say our quarterly report changed someone's life like that?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to thinking about business in these terms. "The foundation will be funded personally by me," David continued. "It won't affect the company's finances. but I will be putting significant time into it.
Because I think it matters.
I think it matters more than anything else I've done. Richard leaned back in his chair, his anger giving way to something that looked almost like respect. You're serious about this? Completely. The investors are going to hate it. Some of them will, David agreed. But I've been reading the comments on these videos. I've been seeing how people are responding. The public reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. And last time I checked, public opinion affects stock prices too. He had a point and everyone knew it. The viral videos had actually increased the company's visibility in ways their marketing department could never have achieved. People were talking about CloudSync's CEO as someone real, someone talented, someone with depth beyond business. Christine spoke up. If we do this, if we support this, you need to do it right. No half measures. Commit fully or don't do it at all. David nodded. That's exactly what I intend to do. The board meeting ended with reluctant agreement to his plan. They'd bring in a COO. They'd restructure his responsibilities. They'd watch the foundation carefully, but they'd give him a chance. After the screens went dark, David sat alone in his office for a long time. Patricia knocked and came in without waiting for an answer. How bad was it? She asked. About as bad as expected. But they agreed. She smiled. You know this is crazy, right? You're one of the most successful people in tech. You could just keep doing what you're doing. Make more money. Build more things. Nobody would blame you. I know. David looked at the message still open on his phone. The one from the security guard about his daughter. But I can't stop thinking about something my mother used to tell me. She said that success without meaning is just noise. For years I thought I knew what she meant. But I didn't, not really. And now you do? Now I do. He stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. All this time I thought I was building something important. And maybe I was. But yesterday when I sat at that piano, I built something different. I built a moment of connection. And hundreds of thousands of people felt it. Patricia joined him at the window. So what happens now? Now comes the hard part. Tomorrow morning I'm holding a press conference. I'm going to announce the Harmony Project officially. I'm going to talk about why it matters. And I'm going to invite people to be part of it. The media is going to have a field day with this. Let them. David smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Patricia had seen from him in months. I spent years trying to control every aspect of my image, trying to be what everyone expected a tech CEO to be. You know what I learned yesterday? What? Nobody cared that I was a billionaire. They cared that I played music that made them feel something. That's what people actually need, not another app or platform or piece of software. They need to feel connected. To beauty, to each other, to something real. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the press conference, about what he would say, about how to explain this shift to people who measured success in dollars and market share. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and sat down at the piano in his apartment. He rarely played here. The instrument was expensive and perfectly maintained, but he almost never touched it. It had become another piece of expensive furniture, like everything else in his life. He started playing, not caring about the late hour or the neighbors. He played the same pieces he'd played in the station, but they felt different here. Less urgent, more peaceful, like he was finally playing for the right reasons. His phone buzzed with a notification. The videos from Grand Central had now been viewed over 50 million times. Musicians around the world had started posting their own performances at public pianos, tagging them with the phrase, "playing it forward." It was becoming a movement. One video showed an elderly woman playing in a park in Seattle. Another showed a teenager at a piano in a mall in Texas, a street musician in London, a music teacher in Chicago, all of them inspired by the mysterious hooded pianist who turned out to be a billionaire, who remembered what mattered. David watched a few of the videos, feeling something warm spread through his chest. This was what he had hoped for without knowing he was hoping for it. Not fame, not recognition, but ripples, waves of people choosing to create beauty and share it freely. His mother would have loved this. Tomorrow he would face the cameras and the questions and the skepticism. Tomorrow he would officially become something more than just a tech CEO. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, he played piano in his apartment, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By 9:30, the room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. News outlets from around the world had sent representatives. This wasn't just a tech story anymore. It had become something bigger. David stood backstage watching the crowd gather through a gap in the curtain. His hands were shaking slightly. He had given hundreds of presentations to investors and business leaders, but this felt different. This time he wasn't selling a product or reporting quarterly numbers. He was trying to explain something that most people would think was crazy. Patricia appeared beside him. "You ready?" "No," he laughed nervously. "But I don't think waiting is going to make me any more ready." "You know what you're going to say?" "I know what I need to say. Whether I can actually get the words out is another question." She squeezed his shoulder. "They're going to think you've lost your mind." "Probably." He took a deep breath. "But maybe that's not the worst thing." At exactly 10 o'clock, David walked out onto the small stage. Camera flashes went off like lightning. Reporters called out questions before he even reached the microphone. He raised a hand and waited for the room to quiet down. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice was steadier than he felt.
"I know there's been a lot of speculation about the videos from Grand Central Station."
"About why I was there. About what it means. So I want to address that directly." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 3 days ago, I left my apartment without my security team, without my assistant, without any of the things that usually define my daily life. I rode the subway. I walked through Grand Central like any other commuter. And I sat down at a public piano and played music for anyone who wanted to listen. More camera flashes. Reporters scribbling notes. Many of you know me as the CEO of CloudSync Technologies. That's been my identity for almost a decade. Building that company, creating that software, achieving that success has defined who I am, or at least who I thought I was. He could see some reporters exchanging glances. This wasn't the kind of statement they usually heard at tech company press conferences. But sitting at that piano, playing for strangers who had no idea who I was or how much money I had, I remembered something important. I remembered why I learned to play music in the first place. Not to impress anyone, not to win competitions, but because creating beauty matters. Because connecting with other human beings matters. Because some things are valuable just for existing, not for what they can be monetized into. David pulled out his phone and held it up. "I've been reading your comments and messages for 3 days straight. Thousands of them. People telling me how that music affected them. A father who called his daughter after years of silence. A young musician who decided not to give up on his dreams. A sick child who smiled for the first time in weeks and asked if she could learn to play piano when she gets better." His voice caught slightly on that last one. He paused to collect himself. "Those messages made me realize something. I've spent a decade building technology that's used by millions of people. I'm proud of that work. But in 3 minutes at a piano, I did something that touched people in a completely different way. I reminded them that beauty exists, that art matters, that we're all connected by something deeper than productivity and efficiency." He could see some reporters nodding now. Others still looked skeptical. "So today I'm announcing the Harmony Project. It's a foundation dedicated to bringing music and art into public spaces. We're going to place pianos in train stations, parks, airports, and town squares across the country. We're going to fund music programs in schools that have lost their funding. We're going to provide grants to working artists and musicians. And we're going to create opportunities for people to experience beauty without having to pay admission or meet some criteria." Questions erupted from the crowd. David held up his hand again. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a publicity stunt, or that I'm having some kind of crisis, or that I'm abandoning the company. None of those things are true. I'm still CEO of CloudSync, but I'm also stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on this foundation. Because I believe it's important. Because I think we need more beauty in the world, not just more efficiency." A reporter called out, "What about your investors? What about the board? Aren't they worried this will affect the company?" "Some of them are," David admitted. "And that's fair. But I've also seen that the public response to this has been overwhelmingly positive. People want to see business leaders who care about more than just profit margins. They want to know we're human beings with values beyond quarterly reports." Another reporter stood up. "Mr. Chen, with all respect, you're a billionaire. You can afford to do something like this. What about the rest of us who are just trying to make ends meet? How is a piano in a train station going to help us?" It was a fair question. David had been expecting it. You're right that I have resources most people don't have, and I'm using those resources to create something. But the beauty of this project is that anyone can participate. You don't need money to sit down at a public piano and play. You don't need wealth to stop and listen to music. You don't need status to experience art, that's the whole point. He looked directly at the reporter who had asked the question. 3 days ago, I was just another guy in a hoodie sitting at a piano. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared how much money I had. They just listened to the music. And for those few minutes, we were all equal. All connected by something that has nothing to do with bank accounts or job titles. The room was quieter now. People were actually listening instead of just waiting to ask questions. I'm not saying music solves poverty or injustice or any of the real problems people face, David continued. But I am saying that beauty and connection and art are not luxuries. They're human needs, and everyone deserves access to them. He took a breath and delivered the final part of his announcement. Starting next week, the Harmony Project will begin installing pianos in 50 cities across the country. We're partnering with local communities to identify the best locations. We're hiring piano technicians to maintain them, and we're inviting everyone, and I mean everyone, to play them. Professional musicians, amateur players, people who've never touched a piano before but want to try. All of you. More questions came, but David could tell the tone had shifted. Reporters were asking about logistics now, about how to get involved, about when pianos would arrive in their cities. The skepticism was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Curiosity, maybe even excitement. After the press conference ended, David went straight to Grand Central Station. Word had spread that he might show up, and a crowd was already gathering around the piano. This time there was no disguise, no hiding. He was wearing a nice shirt and good shoes. His face was clearly visible. He sat down at the same piano where everything had started. The crowd was larger now, maybe 300 people. Phones were already recording. But David didn't care about any of that anymore. He began to play the same Chopin nocturne, the one his mother loved. But this time it felt different. He wasn't playing to escape or to remember. He was playing to celebrate, to say thank you, to honor the choice he had made. In the crowd, he could see the security guard who had sent him that message about his daughter. The man had brought her with him. She was thin and pale, still recovering, but she was smiling. David played for her, for all of them. When he finished, the applause was deafening. But more important than the applause were the faces. People weren't just impressed by technical skill. They were moved. They were connected. They were experiencing something real together. A little boy, maybe 7 years old, pushed through the crowd. "Can I try?" he asked shyly. David stood up and gestured to the bench. "It's all yours." The boy sat down and pressed a few keys experimentally. The notes were hesitant, uncertain. Not quite right. But he was trying, creating, participating. David stepped back and watched. Around him, the crowd watched too. Nobody laughed at the boy's mistakes. Nobody criticized. They just encouraged him. This small human being brave enough to create something in front of strangers. That was when David knew this would work. The Harmony Project wasn't about him or his money or his talent. It was about creating spaces where people could be brave enough to share themselves, where beauty could exist without judgment, where connection mattered more than perfection. Over the next months, pianos appeared in cities across the country. Videos of people playing them flooded social media. Some were talented musicians. Others were complete beginners. All of them were beautiful in their own way. David still ran Cloud Sync, but he spent half his time on the Harmony Project now. He visited new piano installations. He funded music programs. He listened to stories from people whose lives had been touched by a simple idea, that everyone deserves access to beauty. A year later, standing at another public piano in another city, David thought about that morning when he had slipped out of his apartment in disguise. He had been trying to escape, but what he had actually done was find his way home. He had learned that success without meaning is just noise, that wealth without purpose is just numbers, that the things that truly matter can't be bought or sold or put on a balance sheet. They can only be shared. One note at a time, one moment at a time, one connection at a time, and that was worth more than any fortune.